What is the scariest, creepiest theory you know about? Okay, this one is rough, so please bear with me. So the common time travel question is, would you go back and kill baby Hitler? Well, imagine if that was you. To us in the current timeline, you would be a hero that killed someone truly evil before they had chance to corrupt or endanger anyone, but to the people of that time you are a monster, a baby killer. They couldn't exactly explain to people, I was sent from the future to kill this baby to save hundreds of millions of lives. No one would believe him and would just assume he was some nutcase. Or maybe they're not allowed to tell anyone as per the agreement with the future government. It makes you wonder, all the people through time that have been called monsters for killing babies, what if they were just heroes from the future saving us all? They couldn't tell anyone either. Edit. Why do awards? Thank you so much. It may seem sarcastic, but it's been a rough year and this level of acceptance means a lot. Would you want to though? Every monster in human history has been the equivalent of holding your hand to the gas burner, a learning experience for humanity. Those never again moments mature us as a global society. Without Hitler and the subsequent Second World War, where would humanity be instead? Would another have simply taken his place and committed the same atrocities? Would we see more wars because NATO wouldn't exist? It's an interesting theory, the butterfly effect. I need to go to sleep, but I can't put my phone away because of this thread. This isn't a theory, but I just think it's cool. You know how movies and shows always have this ancient alien race that came way before us, and we're the new species? Well, technically, most likely that's wrong. We are near the beginning of the universe. If the universe was a person, we would literally barely be a cell, not even formed. In reality, we are the ancient species. We are the ones that come before. We are the ones some future civilization may see. Just a crazy thing to think about. Damn. In my mind, we are at the pinnacle of development. I guess the reality is we are far from that. Can't imagine how different life will be thousands of years later. Can't even comprehend the fact that I will be long forgotten by then. That a robot could fail the Turing test if it wanted to. I find numbers stations to be pretty creepy. Their purpose is technically a theory, as the groups that broadcast them won't officially confirm even their existence for the most part. Essentially, spying is still a very real thing for most world governments. One of the most foolproof ways of delivering a coded message is through a one-time code, a code used just once before being discarded. Your spy has the key, you have the message, and once the key is used it is discarded and the next message is sent using a different key. Additionally, shortwave radio is an extremely secure way of sending these messages. It sounds weird that a radio station anyone with a shortwave radio can listen to would be considered secure. But the beauty of the method is that shortwave radios are ubiquitous, cheap technology throughout most of the world. What looks more suspicious, a person traveling with a radio, or a person traveling with a sophisticated computer or satellite phone? While the signal can be received by anyone, it leaves no record of who received it and can't be intercepted and traced by a middleman. They don't care if you listen, because the stream of numbers is nothing without the code, and because you're using a one-time code, it can't be cracked as it's randomly generated and used once. The only time a one-time code has ever been broken was an instance where the code was reused. So your spy just tunes into the radio at a specific time on a specific day, writes down the numbers, decodes the message, discards the key, and no one is any the wiser. Most stations are identified by a call sign or little jingle, and these can range from kind of cute and cheerful to pretty eerie sounding. If you listen infrequently, you'll hear messages repeated over and over until one day they change up. It's believed they'll repeat the message until their spy can communicate they've received it. Essentially, if you have a shortwave radio, you can listen in on highly secret spy communications from countries all over the world. You can also listen in on countries jamming the communication, either by broadcasting state radio on the same signal or trying to jam it with noise or static. You'd think the frequency of these transmissions would have gone down after the Cold War, but they're still going strong. The very first numbers stations appeared in the very early days of radio. During World War I find it fascinating, but also super creepy, that all of this secret communication is happening right out in the open for us to tune into at any time, without any way of knowing who it is intended for or what is being transmitted. Not much of a theory, more of a conjecture, but fossilization is actually quite rare. It takes extremely specific set of circumstances for a dead organism to even become fossilized, let alone survive intact to the modern day to be found by humans. Because of this, there are likely millions of species we will simply never know about because none of them ever fossilized. For all we know, we might not even be the first intelligent species to evolve here on Earth. There could have been a species that formed a civilization at some point and then went extinct later on. But we'll possibly never know that because there are no fossils that survive today. It probably wouldn't have been an advanced, industrialized civilization like the kind we have today, as we would have surely found evidence for it by now. But I could easily see something on par with ancient Egypt disappear completely after millions of years. The Vela Incident, September 1979. A U.S. Vela satellite detected a double flash of light over an area of the ocean between South Africa and Antarctica. The prior 41 double flashes observed by the satellite were from nuclear explosions, as this is what they were designed to observe. There also happened to be a typhoon happening in the area at the time, so it seemed like someone wanted to detonate it without being caught. Carter administration reported that it was a natural occurrence due to a small meteorite hitting the satellite. However, many other independent sources and even other countries have reported that they did indeed find traces of fallout and radiation. Because of the geopolitical climate of the times, there's very strong evidence that it was in fact a joint nuclear weapon test carried out by South Africa and Israel. And the US scrubbed the information regarding it because they didn't want to paint their allies in Israel in a bad light for working with apartheid-era South Africa. Strangely enough, Israel and South Africa have never denied having nuclear weapons programs, nor have they ever denied a joint test being responsible for the Vela incident. Any type of human trafficking, poor young kids, vulnerable women trafficked for sex, kept in cages, in tiny apartments, without beds or any amenities. Many forcibly hooked on drugs to keep them compliant and dependent on their owners, forced into terrifying sexual encounters, barely fed or clothed. In places like Dubai, there are tens of thousands of Asian manual laborers who are essentially slaves who have their passports removed, forced to live in severely overcrowded apartments. With upwards of 30+ men sharing a one-bedroom shoebox apartments, no access to medical care, not access to legal support, paid barely enough to feed themselves, who went into Dubai on short-term contracts to provide for their families, but unable to get home. They then lapse the legal period of their visas and contracts, which means if they go to the police to try and leave back home, they face steep fines and jail time for overstaying, which serves as a deterrent to them reaching out for help. Any of those scenarios is purely awful and terrifying to me. If the human body senses trauma it is unable to combat, it will switch off metabolism, pump endorphins, and slip into a pain-free dissociative state. In essence, shutting down. It's been seen in air crashes and lots of places really. Basically, your body can switch itself off. I suffer from PTSD from working in conflict zones. When you're continuously working in these regions, your body pushes past the pain and difficulties you encounter. It modifies your life to always expect danger, and as such it normalizes what you see to cope. But what really hurts is when you come home. The switch your brain makes from survival cannot be processed buying groceries or taking a gentle walk. It thinks that the changes it made in areas of fighting were permanent, and that's why it's so difficult to go back to normal. So basically, when I was abroad, I felt no pain, and the scary part is, I felt invincible. Being back home, I'm in a world of mental anguish and feel like a paper house. The man from Tort. He was going through an airport, and when asked for his passport, he gave the people a fully legitimate passport, except the country he was from didn't exist. He argued that it was right between France and Spain and had been there over 200 years. Since the passport was legitimate but the country wasn't on the map, they put him up in a hotel for the night with guards outside his first-story room. He was gone, along with all his things the next morning, not a trace. The last neuron in the brain can fire up to 72 hours after clinical death. What is classed as still being alive? Your heart stops or your brain activity stopping. As a nurse, this plays on my mind. I always talk to the recently deceased as I would do usually. Hearing is the last sense to go anyway, so chances are people can still hear for a short time after death. I have to confirm death on a daily basis. We check heart sounds, breathing, eye response and pain response, but part of me knows that electrical activity is still going on in there. I'm a hospice nurse and morbid thoughts are what I do best. During the Challenger accident from 1986, whenever the shuttle exploded, the ground crews had the astronauts' EKGs and vital scans. After the explosion, the astronauts were still alive. Theory has it that they were cognizant the entire time until they crashed in the ocean. This is what actually happened. NASA never wanted to admit that the astronauts didn't die in the explosion. But there is a major probability that they were not conscious when they crashed into the ocean. The dark forest theory. This explains the Fermi paradox, why we haven't seen any other advanced life forms despite the vastness of the universe. Other advanced life forms don't send out signals into the rest of the universe because they're worried that something more advanced and dangerous is going to find them first. There's another idea that other civilizations know there's something out there but don't send any signals because it has no reason to not wipe out the entire planet. There's a science fiction book based on this, and I think this quote explains it better than I can. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is an armed hunter stalking through the trees like a ghost, gently pushing aside branches that block the path and trying to tread without sound. Even breathing is done with care. The hunter has to be careful, because everywhere in the forest are stealthy hunters like him. If he finds another life, another hunter, angel, or a demon, a delicate infant to tottering old man, a fairy or demigod, there's only one thing he can do: open fire and eliminate them.